Sony has yet again updated their DualSense controller to this new generation, the BDM 050. And in this video, I'll show you how to identify which version of the controller you have. So here I have the 5 different generations of the DualSense controllers, the BDM 010. Now I don't have the controller for the 020, but I do have a back shell, and we'll be able to identify this series from this back shell, the 030, 040, and the newest one, the 050. And it's very important to know which generation controller you have, because for example, like these hair trigger kits, this one could only be installed on the 040, where this one could be installed on the 020. With the eXtremeRate's remap kit, you have the Rise 2, which is good for BDM 010 and 020. And you have the Rise 4 remap kit that's compatible with 030, 040, and 050. So this is the first generation and the second generation. These are pretty easy to identify. The first generation will have these long words here, similar with the second generation, but the second generation is going to have UKCA logo, and this one will not. And another way to tell is if you closely look up here, you will see that tiny little A, and the first generation will not have that tiny little A. Now the third generation is probably the easiest to tell, just because these logos are very small. You have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 little icons, where here you have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So as you can see, the logos here, they're very tight and snug, and with these logos here, they're a little bit more wider. Now the fourth and fifth generations are identically the same on the back shell labels, so you won't be able to differentiate them apart. There's another way to tell, and it has to do with this little QR code. Now, if your back shell is worn out and you can't see this QR code, you won't be able to tell. But if your QR code is visible like this one, you're just going to scan it with your phone, and it's going to show the serial number. And the second digit of that serial number is going to be either a 1, 2, 3, 4, or a 5, and that tells you which generation of the controller you have. So you will just take your camera and focus on the QR code, and the QR code gives you G3, so you know that's its third gen or a BDM 030. And we can try it with this one that shows E5, so we know that's a 5th generation controller. And this shell here that doesn't have a controller, I mentioned that's a 020, and as you can see it shows G2, so that's a 2nd gen. And if you check carefully in the back of the controller, the serial number will actually be printed in very small print, and that second character shows you what generation controller. The only thing is, as you can see on these controllers, it's in different areas of the back controller, and you don't really know which the serial is. You just have to be kind of used to it. So it might get scratched out, or if you use the controller too much, you won't be able to see it. There's also this chart that identifies which controller you have by removing the trigger, but I find that it's hard to label it, and checking the serial or QR code is a little bit easier in my opinion. Okay, now that we have that sorted out, let's check the 040 and the 50 and see what the differences looks like inside. So we're going to take off those front shells, and we have 2 screws here we're going to unscrew, and then we're also going to pop these top triggers, and it's going to expose 2 more screws. So let's get those 4 screws unscrewed real quick. Okay, now that we have those unscrewed, we're just going to pop these 2 little hooks here, 1 and 2, and this should open the controller, so then we could peel them apart. Checking right off the back, you could tell that the trigger mechanism is a little bit different here. I think this is the main change in the new generation. So this is the 040, and the 050. You could also tell here that there is no pin here, so the mechanism for the trigger is a lot different here. As with these older generations, they all had this pin that you had to remove, and that's how the trigger was connected. We could also tell here that this wiring here and this mechanism is a little bit different as well, with this green ribbon cable, where in this one it's similar to the 030. So the batteries, they seem to be identical. As for the motherboard, they seem to be pretty much the same. I don't see too much difference on here. In here on this side of the board, as you can see, it says 050, and on this one it shows 040. Now I noticed on the 050, on the last character there's always some kind of a letter. One board I opened, it said 050A. This one says 050R. I'm not sure what that means. If anyone knows, drop a comment for me. But yeah, this is just from the surface level. The differences between the 040 and the 050, the biggest thing I see is the new mechanism for the triggers, and that's why it makes sense that eXtremeRate uses this kit for the 030 and the 040, and this one for the 010 and the 020, and for the trigger kit for the 050, I believe they do not have one yet. Most likely it's under development just because of the new mechanism, so they have to re-engineer the whole thing again. So now that we have this controller open, the 050, let's install our back paddle kit. If you want to get the back paddle kit, make sure you guys check out the link below. I'm going to leave the Amazon link. They're at a great price now. They dropped the price. Now you could get one of these for like $27. That's almost double the price that they were before. And if you go to the eXtremeRate website and you use my promo code GAMER2KNOW, you'll get additional 10% off. So with the back paddle kit, we're going to get the brand new back shell, the necessary hardware tools, the back paddles, and the ribbon cable and the motherboard for the installation. So what I like to do first is I like to install these back paddles to the back shell. So this clicks on here. This is the frame. We're just going to put 4 screws in the back here. Now that that's installed, we're going to take our 2 rods here. Insert it into the paddle. So this is K1. That's K1. I'm just going to put it right in there. K2. So the paddles are installed here. We can put that aside for now. Now we're going to get this packet here. Comes with more hardware and ribbon cables. Now this installation is very easy. It's not going to require you to solder. You can solder. You're going to solder this piece, but that's to map the L3 and the R3 button. But I don't use that, and most of the people I know do not use that, so I usually toss it away. So we're going to take this ribbon cable, and this way with the sticker up, we're going to insert it into these 2 pins here. And when we insert it in here, we just want to make sure that it stays nice and steady and doesn't move around, because these 2 pins should lock it into place. What happened with me before, I would put this and it would rip here, and if something like that happens, you don't have to return the product. You just contact eXtremeRate and they will send you new parts for your installation. So take a note of that they're very helpful. If something occurs that breaks or some ribbon cables malfunction. So now we're just gonna gently put this back, take off all these cables here, and just put everything back how it was, including this battery shell, battery back inside. Now we're going to take this part out so it sticks. Make a little bend here. Now this piece that we built earlier, it's ready to go. So once you put that in, you just want to push the top first, line up the top, and then the bottom should click in. And here's the little motherboard that we had earlier. I'll just put that in there. Make sure that this wire is nice and snug inside. Because if it's not gonna work. Then you have to take it apart. Once you put everything together, taking apart is not fun. Okay, so let's put this board back in here. Now we take these smaller screws. There's big ones and small ones. So these small ones go here on this motherboard. So there we have these 2 screws here. These buttons are good. Now let's just finish assembling this last part. I'm going to put our 2 other buttons inside like this. Power button here. This little LED screen or lens on top here. You can hold everything together, and you put this back in by you put the top first. Oh, power button slipped out. So you do the top first, then the bottom. Let's finish assembling this. We're just going to put these 4 screws back in that we took out earlier. So we're not done yet till the fat lady sings. So let's hook up this controller. So let's map it first. To map it, we're going to put this, hold it for a few seconds till the red light lights up. Once the red light lights up, we're going to push the paddle and the button we want to map at the same time. And what should happen is that it should blink fast. Okay, those are mapped. That's mapped. That's mapped. That's mapped. Once you finish, just hold it. So now let's check it out, and just to make sure everything works. So as you can see, all those back buttons are now mapped to this 4 buttons.